It was this amazing thing where I realized that if we could awaken people just like I was for 20 years to maybe look at the human being behind the transaction, we could do more good. We'd have better people, better technology, better data. There'd be more of us than them. And the problem is, just like me, and I was the chief of them, I was asleep.
Like millions of people around the world, we need to work. Some do it for the money, others do it for the recognition. And if you're lucky, you do it because you love it. But finding purpose and passion in your work can be easier said than done, and the path to success can be unpredictable at best. But if you're looking for some inspiration, then I've got one question for you. Are you consuming your career, or is it consuming you? Welcome to Consuming Careers. I think you'd agree that one of the most tragic artifacts of today's society is the proliferation of human trafficking. Hi, I'm Bruce Smith, and in this week's episode of Consuming Careers, we're meeting with Ian Mitchell, who, while on his quest for a meaningful purpose in his life, was awakened to the horrors of human trafficking. Slowly, he began to realize that his entire career was preparing him for this battle. And today, Ian is a leader in the fight against sex trafficking, child exploitation, and elder scams, but not with weapons or force. Instead, by attacking the lifeblood that fuels these hideous crimes, the digital flow of money. And a word of caution here, due to the sensitive nature of this topic, please be mindful of those who may overhear this podcast. Now, let's join my conversation with Ian. All right, well, welcome back to the Consuming Careers podcast, and I'm really excited to have my new friend, Ian Mitchell, with me. Ian, so glad you could join me on this.
Bruce, thank you for the invitation. I'm glad you could make it out here, and we get to spend some time together. It's going to be great.
Well, you say out here. Can you describe what out here is?
I'm in the Chattanooga area.
Yep.
I live, I call Chattanooga home. I've lived all over the country, and just blessed to call Chattanooga home. I have 60 acres on the side of a mountain here. We're actually sitting on my back deck. Just a beautiful view of just somewhere. Growing up in cities, I never would have thought that I'd be out in the country somewhere, and that's where we find ourselves on my property here outside the back deck of my house.
Well, there's not much city near us, and I don't think I can see or hear city from where we are.
Everything fades away when I make it home.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, this is such a beautiful place. Just a great view. I don't know, that's probably a 10-mile view, if not more, from all direction.
It is. It's just gorgeous. You can see Lookout Mountain, and just it's just beautiful. Especially during 4th of July and such, you can see kind of fireworks in the city, and the way the sun sets, sun rises is just gorgeous. Again, city person, never would have thought that I'd find a home out here, but it's so darn peaceful. So much of my life is spent on the road traveling, and when I come back home, everything just kind of melts away and fades away.
Oh, that's great. Well, when we were setting up this day and time, it was probably 18 degrees. We were thinking, well, we're never going to be able to do this outside. We better find a fireplace.
Oh, this is gorgeous.
And this has turned out to be a beautiful day.
Yeah, it is. Just couldn't be more perfect. I got the sun in my eyes, but outside of that,
that's right.
We're in great shape.
Well, we can't. No one can hear the sun, so I think we're going to be okay.
We're good.
Well, could you kind of bring the audience up to just kind of who is Ian Mitchell, and just what you're doing now briefly, and we can get into that later, but just kind of an overview.
Who is Ian? That's a question I get asked.
That's a big question.
That's deep, and I'm still trying to figure that one out.
Have you been asking yourself that a lot lately?
Oh my gosh, I can't even tell you. The last 20 years of my life, I'm 46 years old now, and a father of 3, married for 20 years.
Okay.
Those are all things that are a part of my life. Who is Ian? Well, for me, I'm a child of God. To me, I'm a fraud fighter. I'm a human crime fighter. I'm a grown man sometimes that's a whole lot quirky. I've got a personality that a lot of times people like or don't. It's polarizing at times.
Yep.
An eternal optimist, and just somebody that's been through the ringer and have found a way to land in a really great place, thank God.
Well, I don't feel polarized yet. So
okay, great.
Well, we got some time.
Give it a little bit of time. That's right, yeah.
Well, tell me about your background. Like, where did you grow up and kind of early career, and was that kind of a... and the game plan. Did you have a game plan kind of going into your career? What did all that look like?
Well, I was born in Germany. I've lived in 5 countries, including the U.S., but Singapore and Tokyo and Canada. I've lived in several places, 13 states now. I've lived all over. It's just been kind of part of my childhood and my adult life. And so that's just been a part of who I am. I think I think you asked me careers. I think when I was a swimmer in high school. I ended up being a Division I swimmer. I was a sprinter.
Wow. Yeah.
I ended up being pretty fast. I went to school out in Seattle, Washington. I was a Husky out in Seattle. And my plan then was to get into television. So I don't tell a lot of people this, but I was doing, not only as a swimmer, but I was also a model. I do a lot of print ads. So I did work for like Nike and Adidas and Eddie Bauer and Nordstrom's. I did that for several years, helped me get through college, pay the bills.
Great. Yeah.
I thought I was going down the TV route. In fact, I was interning at ABC News. I've got just some amazing, working as an intern in a news station, seeing UFOs, all kinds of just crazy things that just happened, and wonderful stories about that time. But I thought I was going down the TV path. That was my plan. I was heading out to California. There was an agency out in California that said when I moved down to LA, they would take me on, and I had done some commercials and such. And so I thought that was my path. And then I stumbled into it was the .com age.
Okay.
And I went to go get some stock options at a .com, and I stumbled into some fraud.
Ooh.
And honestly, the rest is history. I found some fraud. We thought it was good customers. Over a weekend, I stopped something like $300,000 in orders from this major .com, and I got pulled into the CFO's office the next workday, and he's like, "What are you doing?" And I told him what was going on. They said, "Go at it." And we found, we were stopping hundreds of thousands of dollars in orders on fraud. And
that was with the company you were with, or you were a consultant?
The company I was with. So I was working with drugstore.com. We had some partnerships with Amazon. This is before the .com fraud craze. And there's several of me that have similar stories running around the country. But that's how I stumbled into this. And I just caught that bug. It was kind of I don't know. It just completely forgot about the rest of it. I started a fraud organization there and fraud controls, and then I moved on to Citibank, and then in my career I've been blessed to be managing fraud in over 14 countries. I say for over 14 because I lose count. I think the number is actually over 20, but all over Latin America and Asia. I've managed fraud teams at several financial institutions. I've been fortunate to be the executive leader of fraud at several financial institutions. Spent time at Price Waterhouse there as a partner there. Ended up leading their fraud practice.
Wow.
It's just been a great career fighting fraud. One I never planned on getting into, but I was a trained communicator, I think, and that's maybe where some of the stuff has definitely helped the career.
So when you say fighting fraud, was that operational? Was it technical? Or where was your focus? Was it more on the IT side or the physical?
Well, early on, I was doing analytics of all things, and that's interesting. I was a coder of a solution called SaaS. I wasn't a very good one, but I just understood for some reason how fraud was happening, and just made sense to me. I can't explain why, I started through the analytics, really having a respect for data, utilizing data, working with decision science organizations to treat data and build models. I did that for the beginning part of my career. And then I got into operations. I just love people. And so that ended up being something that I led up big operations teams and the analytics organizations. But really the foundation of my approach on fraud management has always been rooted in having an appreciation for analytics, measuring.
Got it. Yeah, so big banking background, so you've seen it from the inside.
Correct.
And then PwC, seeing it from the outside.
Correct.
And probably across multiple clients and industries, and picking up how different industries fraud is perpetrated. Yeah.
Interesting about fraud is a lot of people don't know that it exists. It's in stories and such. There's actually a really good movie going on in Netflix now. It has to do with couponing fraud. But it's interesting, the bad actors, the criminals, are constantly trying to one-up the defenses you put in. So it's this constant cat-and-mouse game that just makes it so interesting. During the holidays, the minute you launch a new product or you launch something, new channel, these bad actors, these fraudsters will find a way to exploit it almost immediately. Yep. And so it just becomes this really highly, intoxicating chase of trying to put something in, outmaneuver them. They come in, and within days or weeks, they're trying to, circumvent what you just did. And so it's this never-ending. I always love to say it's for risk professionals with ADD. That's just what it is, because it's just constantly. It's one challenge after another, and there's rarely for fraud fighters. They're some of the most resilient people in the business.
Oh, they've got to be. Yeah. Well, it's certainly job security, right?
Unbelievable, especially right now. It is going crazy.
It's going crazy. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I've always thought that if the fraudsters would just put as much effort into doing good as they do with bad, it would be, not only would it be, the world would be a much better place, but a lot more people would kind of get sleep at night. And
that's right.
Gosh, anyway,
that's a whole moral issue that we can just get into and go down a path.
That's right.
But you're right. There is a lot of people that look at the world and look at money and entitlement and all kinds of things and through a lens where I can't understand it fully, but I have had the pleasure of meeting people that were fraudsters and are now, some have been pastors, some have been like, they've stolen millions in credit cards and check fraud, and some are now doing very, very important things in the fight that we're in. And so it does. I think upbringing has a lot to do with it. I think, and then just vulnerability and severe need, I think, is a lot of the things that just go into. I mean, of course, there are bad people, but then there's some that are just opportunistic and maybe don't have that moral compass.
Yeah. So, tell me about and was PwC your last stop before the Noble?
PwC was actually while I was doing the Noble. So I started the Noble, and and then I went to PwC.
So tell me about that and that. How that started. What's the origination story for the Noble?
So to really understand the Noble, you have to understand where I was right before the Noble. So I moved out here to the Chattanooga area to get away from corporate America. I was burned out. I wore the tread off my tires. I was completely done with fighting fraud. In fact, it's kind of a good friend of mine stayed with us for 2 years helping us build this house or put it back together. And he would say, Ian, when you would mention fraud, I'd see you get sick in your mouth. I mean, it's so graphic. It's terrible. But to understand where I was more focused on growing a hideous beard. I grew my goatee out for a year and a half and didn't cut it. Just to grow it, I was completely done. And when I would go still speak at these events, people would look at me and go, you're either a rock star or you're a terrorist, but either way you look horrible. And I was just rejecting. And in fact, I was up in Nashville all the time, working on songwriting at one of the largest labels up there. And so that's where I was. I was completely moved on. And I have a real influential friend down in Atlanta. And I would go to his house and I'd meet Hall of Fame basketball players there. Wow. I'd met CEOs of major companies, Evander Holyfield, and there's all kinds of people that go there. And so I would go to his house. And one time in particular, I met somebody who had been fighting human trafficking for 3 decades. And he started talking to me over a cup of coffee about this human trafficking problem. I knew nothing about it.
Is that Matt?
Matt Friedman.
Okay.
Yeah. And I was a music hippie at that point. That's what Matt would call me. And so he didn't know I was a former banker. And something happened in one of the conversations that changed everything for me. And I realized that maybe I missed something in my 20-year career fighting fraud. And it wasn't just trafficking. It was scams. The scam problems was largely being ignored. And this child exploitation, mass gun violence. Again, being a data person, I had seen how powerful the data we had was and how we could use it to do good. And so something triggered in there.
What was it? Do you remember what it was?
I remember it's so simple. He was in Atlanta, and I said, Matt, what are you doing here? He said, I'm here to talk to one of the banks about fighting human trafficking. And I said, what do you mean? What is that even? Why would you talk to a bank? And he started talking to me about this data problem, but he gave me a couple examples, and one really hit home. He said, even dollar transactions in the middle of the night at a nail salon or a massage parlor on a credit card. So in a credit card, $100, $200, $300 being swiped in the middle of the night. And it's funny, I remembered those transactions. The reason I remember those transactions is MasterCard. I was a MasterCard issuer at the time. They basically require something called a collusive merchant. You're trying to see if the merchant is a fraudulent merchant. Yeah. And I remember building this whole program, seeing these even dollar weird batch settlements at these exact type of merchants. Yep. And not ever seeing them go fraud. They didn't ever go bad. They would actually pay, and they would actually. And I remember thinking that was just so strange. The fact that they would perform those transactions in the middle of the night, and they would batch bulk process them, and it was just interesting to me. And so I remembered that, and so something about that seeded and created interest in me. And then I became on this journey to understand how I could help. And that was a good 3 or 4 week process as I walked that part out. Yeah, yeah. That was the inception of the Noble, really. And the Noble idea really came to me when I was on stage talking to a group, one of my last speaking engagements, several thousand people in the audience. I was talking about this very debated topic of the convergence of cyber, fraud, and anti-money laundering professionals and trying to work together. Yep. And I was talking at this event at the American Bankers Association, and I remember looking out and realizing, I remembered something Matt said. Matt said something like only 0.2% of people are rescued from human trafficking. And we spend more money on bags of chips than rescuing human trafficking victims or trying to detect them. And I remembered when I was on stage, I remembered looking out at this group, and I realized if we could awaken them, We'd have better people and technology and data and training. We'd have hundreds of thousands of people. This is while I was on stage speaking, I had this vision of the noble come to me.
Yeah.
It was this amazing thing where I realized that if we could awaken people just like I was for 20 years
Yep.
to maybe look at the human being behind the transaction, we could do more good. We'd have better people, better technology, better data. There'd be more of us than them. And the problem was that just like me, and I was the chief of them, I was asleep. Problem was I was so busy, balancing customer experience and protecting the bank from fraud losses.
Sure.
I didn't understand that maybe I had an ability to do more impact than I was.
Wow. Okay. So that conversation with Matt,
Yep.
kind of was that awakening.
That's right.
And then you built the Noble.
Yeah.
Just you.
Initially, it was just me and one other person named Joshua Hale down in Atlanta, and him and I would do something really small.
That's funny.
And Joshua and I would go around and have conversations at banks and, work with them. And, for probably about a good 6 or 8 months. And then somebody named Sean Holtzlaw came in and Sean came in and he said, hey, Ian, let me help scale this. And he came in and brought a whole team. And
wow.
It just took off from there. And really, the goal was just to awaken the financial community. Not talk about it, but create action. And so that's what we do. We do initiatives to try to mobilize the financial community to fight human crime, as we call it.
Okay, so can you give kind of an overview of the state of human crime?
Sure.
In any context, whether that's the United States or globally?
Well, the United Nations, we'll talk trafficking first. It's not known as modern slavery worldwide. Mm-hmm. The United Nations put out a couple years ago saying that there's about 50 million people caught in modern slavery worldwide. Wow. It's anywhere between 85% of those people are in forced labor. So where they're forced to work, they're not getting paid. There's all kinds of, and they're making textiles, agriculture, fishing. There's all kinds of, and then 15 to 25% of those are in sex trafficking. In North America, we focus a lot on sex trafficking.
Yeah.
But the biggest impact we potentially could have, especially as consumers, is the labor trafficking side, where we choose to buy and spend our money differently and shop at places that have anti-trafficking kind of approaches.
Right.
So it's 50 million people worldwide. It's more slaves today than any other time in human history. I mean, I think we don't like to use that word and have that context, but there's a lot of people that every day show up and aren't being paid and are being beaten and forced to without pay. And then we have the child exploitation. And what I would say is, they probably should have said this up front. If anybody, there's little ears on the phone. I always want to be careful if somebody's listening, if we're on speaker, it would be a good time to put headphones on because of some of the stuff that I'll share here. But child sexual exploitation is also an area where the financial industry is getting involved, helping law enforcement, and the sexual abuse of children, especially online with images, has been going up significantly. There's different organizations that have talked about how many images. I think it's like 32 million images. I mean, just significant amount of images are being passed around. And so that exploitation of children and the re-exploitation with every one of those images is terrible. And so it traditionally hasn't been a financially motivated crime, although when I was at the United Nations about 6 months ago, I was learning in the whole first day of series how it's becoming increasingly more criminalized. The criminal organizations are getting behind this, using also artificial intelligence, extortion. So especially in the West, boys between 13 and 16 are being targeted and convinced to take pictures of themselves, and then they're being extorted with fear of being released, these pictures being released. Oh, wow. So it's becoming a financial problem even more so than it was. The scams problem, I like to say, is the biggest financial crime problem we have in the world today. Since the pandemic, fraudsters and criminals realize that instead of going after the banks, the government's giving out so much money. Let me go after the weakest link in the chain, which is all of us, right? And so that scams problem is huge, and it's funneling money all over the world that is funding human trafficking and terrorist financing and drugs. We're just finding that the diversification of these criminal enterprises are more than we ever thought. And the last one we focus on is elder financial exploitation, which is an important one. It's one that has received attention historically, but I get back to, I think the banks and the financial services can do better than just meeting compliance regulations, and we're seeing that now. Banks are hiring, teams of people to use advanced detection and analytics and models to look for the financial exploitation of elders, and so having an old, my father's in the house, he's 80 plus, and I look at just all of us are vulnerable, but I'd look into kind of where he is in life and others, and it's, we all get there. And so it's just important that we bring something better to the fight than just being compliant.
Yeah, that strikes home with me. So we've got friends, we've got family that have been kind of struck with not only on the elder side, but just the fraud. I mean, it's rampant. Yeah. I imagine pretty much everybody that's listening to this has a story around that. What advances are you seeing on the bank side, not only internally of the tools and the processes that they're using, their controls maybe, but also the way they're working together between banks?
I love the question. So I am starting to see, especially in the last couple of years, the use of machine learning, building dedicated teams to build processes around if you suspect something, how do you investigate human trafficking or child exploitation? The banks have the most robust anti-fraud, anti-money laundering programs, and I'm seeing the best of the best come in and build those around these human crimes.
Great.
I'm so encouraged.
That's great.
We were nascent before, and if I just a couple of years ago, we did surveys of our participating members in banks, and we have over 1,000 financial institutions involved in the Noble. Over 1,400 organizations are represented.
Wow.
Over 3,000 financial crime fighters. We did surveys over them, and something like 30% of banks had detection of human trafficking in place. And now, I think in our most recent survey, and it hasn't been published yet, but I think I saw that over 70% of the financial institutions that are involved with us now have detection in place for human trafficking, which that's huge.
Is that inside the four walls, or is that technology being shared? Are they sharing data? Can they share data?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
So it's primarily inside the four walls.
Okay.
We do have some constructs that exist that the government has allowed for banks to share information, and for banks to share information to law enforcement.
So what's the holdup with that? Like, why can't they do that more readily, or why don't they? Or is there a different motivation, or is it regulatory?
You're gonna get me on a whole 10-minute tangent here, but I'll try to sum it up for you because this is one of my favorite topics, Bruce, in the whole world. This is I love this topic.
Why can't we solve it faster?
Yeah. Well, I think we're looking at the problem through a compliance set of lens versus a risk management set of lens. So we do advanced information sharing for credit risk scoring, for fraud detection.
Right.
And the way we're looking at these human crime problems, I think we're looking at it more like a compliance problem versus we have the ability to share information at scale. I mean, just think about what we do to fight credit card frauds.
Sure.
So if we take some of those technologies, we can advance it. I think there is this is just Ian speaking. I think there is a hesitancy that maybe regulators won't support advancements like this.
Yep.
I think there are organizations that help facilitate some information sharing with the largest financial institutions. They are doing that. But we got to do it at scale. And then there's some technologies, platforms that facilitate it. But the problem is there's over 4,100 financial institutions in the U.S. alone.
Yep.
There's over 5,100 financial institutions in European Union. I think 83 banks and financial institutions in Canada. That's a lot of organizations. And so we need to find a way to scale this information bigger than what we're doing just with our isolated processors or platforms. So that's a challenge too, is trying to do it at scale. And the last thing I think is we have to modernize the way information is being passed to and from government. The feedback loop from law enforcement to banks is lacking.
Yep.
And the ability for law enforcement to help pass intelligence to financial institutions is lacking. I also think that financial institutions need to modernize their help of law enforcement. So that whole area between government, there's a lot of privacy concerns. I don't want to undermine that.
Absolutely.
But just from my perspective, we can risk rate these. We can do this in a very responsible way as a private industry to help law enforcement.
Well, just looking from the outside in, because I don't know until really what you've shared today, really fully understood what the Noble does, and I'm sure there's plenty more. But I got to imagine that the motivation for a bank to release data on itself that may be incriminating is probably a deterrent, right? Because if there's money laundering going on, and pick a bank, right, and news comes out, this has been washed through, name the bank. That would be debilitating.
It has been a historical deterrent for sure. There were as a time where banks didn't want to admit that they had fraud, and so they didn't want to look for it. And so I've lived this in 20 years, but all have fraud. And so it's one of those situations. I think we're turning a corner. There were banks that really set up the regulators to come down hard on them because they didn't have the basics in place. I think we're getting to that point where banks that have problems, they're being identified. And it's so interesting. I was just talking to the executive team of one of the largest North American banks, and they don't don't just want to build a compliant financial crime program. They're in this rebuild model right now. They want to build one that does more than what's even being asked. And they want to go after the human traffickers. They want to go after the scammers. They want to, and I think that's where we're in right now, where there's a tide changing, where it's not just enough to be compliant. And I'm seeing this at fintechs and some of the legacy banks, and definitely the credit unions are leading the charge. They're member-centric. So I think we're moving past that, but banks still have to care for the basics, and that means fighting fraud and detecting money laundering and being basically compliant. But that's not enough for us to fight human trafficking or human crimes effectively.
Yeah. Is there a silver bullet?
No.
No.
Like I told you before on the fraud side, we put one control in and they use they overcome it just in days or weeks. And it's the same thing around human crimes. The minute we open a new channel or a new person-to-person payment mechanism, the bad actors will exploit it, and they diversify. This is something that just blows my mind, especially these human traffickers. They're diversifying and using big banks and small banks and all kinds of payment types. It's not just cash and cryptocurrencies. It's everything. It's person-to-person payments. It is ACHs. It is gift cards. Our entire financial industry is being leveraged to exploited to commit crime. It doesn't mean it's so rampant that it's not controlled and we're negligent. It just means that we need to be diligent. And that's what I want to make sure. We're not walking around in a broken, I'm not spreading that we're walking around in a broken financial system. We have so many amazing technologies. I just think that we can do more to be more diligent, and we can modernize to move faster. And I think that's the message. Again, we have the best people in the world at banks all around the world. I was on the phone last night with a South African bank, and 350 people it was 2 o'clock in the morning for me, and I'm talking to them at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I've never seen so many emoticons when I was talking.
Oh, that's funny.
The hearts and the pluses and the smileys and the wows. I mean, it was amazing. It was such a wonderful feedback. That would never happen in so many of the Western countries that I would speak to, but it was amazing to, especially at 2 o'clock in the morning, to have that kind of instant feedback. But secondly, the passion that I hear, and the fact that there were 350 people from South Africa on there, and people like them exist all over the world, from Singapore to Australia to all over Europe. There's more good people in the fight than there are bad people. And I think that's important for us to remember. So if we get organized, we work in a non-competitive way. I always say fighting evil is not competitive. We actually can outflank these bad actors.
Well, you're smiling. I love seeing that smile. You're getting really excited about this.
I get passionate.
Give me a success story. Is there a success story that you can share?
Well, I've got a couple of them. One around the Super Bowl. So we started, I think it was about 3 years ago. I had one of the top names in fighting fraud named Frank McKenna and a friend of mine, Marianne Miller. We were on the phone with Homeland Security. They thought they had an incident of human trafficking in a fraud data, and ended up being not that. But the Homeland Security agent said, from the Center of Countering Human Trafficking, this is a new division that was opened up in Homeland Security. And he said, Ian, we've only ever had 7 banks helping us detect around the Super Bowl. And I thought we could do better than that. So we, this is our 3rd year now, we have had a Super Bowl project where about 30 banks, the largest local, smallest banks, come together to assist law enforcement all around an event. And I'm not saying that with the Super Bowl there's more human trafficking. What I'm saying is that anytime you get people together to party, there's people wanting to sell good and bad wares. And this, in this case, it happens to be human beings. And we've had 50 people come in these projects with the sole purpose to help law enforcement around these events.
That is fantastic.
We've done it around the U.S. Open. We've done it around the World Games. We're going to try to do F1 in Montreal this year. We're hoping to do that. I was talking to the Globe and Mail. We're really going to try to make that happen this year. These are catalysts. These are initiatives that gets everyone involved to think differently, and I think that's amazing. And
when you have a win like that, they see a vision for the future. Like, we can really actually make an impact. Instead of just being a standalone, executive or someone in a bank. Like, it's just me, and I can't really, But when you've got 50 people in a room,
that's right,
kind of making an impact, that kind of really accelerates it.
The thing I love the most is out of that project, both the first 2 Super Bowls we did, 30% of the banks, give or take, didn't have human trafficking detection before the project.
Wow.
And they do now.
Wow.
And big banks, amazing large financial institutions that have robust human trafficking programs are helping the smallest and helping regionals in a very open, collaborative, bankers with heart. I got to tell you, that's one of my big things right now. So many banks, we get such a bad rap for just being looking for money and just trying to exploit.
Sure.
Some of it's probably deserved, but I will tell you, I have met more bankers with heart. I've been around them, from the executives down to the people that just joined banks. There's so many that want to do good. And these are just evidence. These projects are evidence of that.
And I'll be honest, my first reaction, if you ask me, do bankers care, right? My first reaction would be, well, I bet they look the other way. They care, but they look the other way. But what you're telling me is it's not that at all. No. Maybe there was a time that was though, but what you're telling me is they're really engaged.
I'm not telling you there are not people in banks that look the other way.
Okay.
I've talked to hundreds of C-suite executives, just C-suites alone, at banks and largest financial institutions. And after I talk to them about fighting fraud and helping them, and I always talk to them about fighting human crime. And after this conversation, I've only ever had one in hundreds that looked at me deadpan afterwards and said, Ian, I never want to hear that again.
Wow.
One. And I use that as it was chilling, and I still remember that feeling I had. But I've had hundreds that say, wow, Ian, everything from, I'm so glad your team, and I'm so glad the Noble and the industry doing that, to, how can I help and support? Or 3, you've not only inspired me to build anti-human trafficking or anti-scams or anti-exploitation, but you've given us purpose.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is so many bankers just need purpose outside of paying their mortgage payment or their cell phone bills. And that, to me, is the biggest reason for what we're doing, is that bankers, just like all human beings, just need a reason for waking up every day. A job's a job.
Sure.
But this is something that has enriched everyone that's been involved.
Well, speaking of purpose, can you think about the way you viewed purpose, the first 20 years of your career? And what did that look like compared to what sounds like a very strong alignment of skills, passion, purpose? Talk to me a little bit about that. What's changed?
This is it's a little bit on the personal side of the journey, but I don't often share. But I when I moved out here onto this beautiful acreage, I moved it really trying to find my purpose. I had been, as a fraud fighter, when I wasn't in Shanghai fighting fraud, I was in a little bus in eastern Kentucky or South Carolina playing music for different addiction ministries and I was always playing music. Music's been a big part of my life, but I always separated my day job from my passion for helping people. And
so you didn't think you could have a purpose in work?
It was the work was to allow me to have the purpose outside of work.
In music.
Or just helping people. I've had friends that are literally on parole with ankle bracelets, and I've been a part of their lives. Drug addicts. I mean, I've always had this side of me, but I always viewed my work as the thing that allowed me to do what I felt like I was supposed to do.
Was that the way you viewed it, or was that just true? Just kind of, that's the way it is?
I think that's the way I was taught it is.
Okay, good.
I think that's it. I remember walking down the hallway when I was at a major financial institution, and I just had an amazing win getting approval for a multi-million-dollar fraud investment. And I remember walking down the hallway, and all of a sudden, just a wave of grief came over me, and I'm like, this isn't enough. That wasn't a big enough win. I want to do something more. And I multiple times have threatened my wife to say, I'm quitting. We're going to go and sell everything, and we're going to go move somewhere. And so that's basically what happened when we moved here. I was so done with that. And so I would go onto our mountain here, and I'm going to take you on this walk later. Excellent. And I would do it 10 o'clock every single day. Every single day I was in town, I would go on a walk, and I would pray for purpose. And I would just pray, and I would pray. And for that one thing, I needed a purpose. And it's interesting, again, this isn't a preachy thing. This is just that candid. I had nothing. I was a fraud fighter that wasn't fighting fraud anymore. I was a musician that I didn't really want to go on tour. I didn't want to. That never was my plan. I needed purpose. I needed something that was bigger than me. And for the better part of a year, every day when I was here, I'd go on a long walk. I'd go hike. I've cut trails all through our property here, and I'd go and I would just be praying for purpose. And then I met Matt Friedman, and something just triggered inside saying, maybe I've been trained for as long as I have. And this merging of my two mountains, the mountain of fighting fraud and financial crime, and this mountain of music and helping people, just kind of merged into one over my year-long journey of seeking purpose.
Now, I want to ask you about purpose, because that's, this whole podcast is about purpose and passion and perseverance. And it's an elusive topic. So now, did your dad, who's here, would he say he had a purpose in his work and his career? or maybe even his dad. So my question is it a modern concept that we have to have, or we have this need for purpose in our work?
I think, again, this is my opinion. Sorry,
That's
Dad.
what I want to hear.
Sorry, Dad, if you're listening. I don't know that when we say modern, I think purpose and the view of work, just when I read, for me, it's the Bible. When I look at historical documents, I think there was a different way of viewing work.
Yeah.
And I think somewhere, whether it's the baby boomer time, whatever it is, even when I look at I was watching people in the 1930s going through the Great Depression and what they looked like, I think somewhere along the way, our purpose became to save money, to live to 60, to retire at 65, so you can go to a golf course. Somewhere in the last 50 or so, 100 years, something shifted. And so I don't know how modern, I think that may be more modern than the other view of what life was about.
Yeah.
Being more, and I think some of the countries that I grew up in, they probably have a better understanding of what, and not saying there wasn't people that were looking for power and money and all that. Those always exist. But the average person, I just, my sister is a Filipino, and I went to go visit her family, and just the simplicity of life. I think that's what I see as probably being more noble, more, and so I think somewhere along the way, especially in the Western countries, we probably got a little mixed up somewhere.
Yeah.
And I see now a reverting to, when economy goes bad and things start, where do we anchor in? We anchor in things that are more simple, more basic. And I think that's what's going on. We anchor in authenticity versus working the system for personal gain.
Right.
And so I think we're getting to the point where we're evaluating everything from our food systems to our monetary systems.
Yeah.
It is a beautiful season that I'm seeing happening all over the world.
Yeah, I think the pendulum, in my opinion, the pendulum is kind of swung. Like if I look at my grandparents, their purpose was to work to put food on the table so that their family could live a decent, healthy, safe life. And then I think in recent years, pick a number, 20 years, it became more internal, like I need to be fulfilled. I need to have a purpose. Regardless of my impact in the world, like I need to be.
Yeah.
So I think that's the far end of the pendulum, and I make a joke about there's all these leadership podcasts and books, but there's no fellowship. How to be a good employee, how to be a good servant, how to be a good team member. Everybody wants to be a great leader.
That's right.
Well, somebody's got to row the boat, right? Yeah. So, and how do you do that with just pride for your work and things like that. So that purpose question I think can trick people up. Like I don't know how it impacted you, but when I hear that you spent a year kind of searching for purpose, then I've got to ask, like, were you asking the questions of how can I impact others, or was it all how can I feel better about my work? Right? Is it both? It sounds like it was probably both, and you were just wrestling through that.
I view work as just like my songwriting. I think of my fingernails.
Yeah.
Every day I wake up, my fingernails grow. I don't have to think about them. They're growing. The fingernails are useful tools to get things accomplished. If I didn't have fingernails, my life would be a little harder.
Yeah.
I view work as an expression. These jobs, the nonprofit, my for-profit company that fights fraud, Mission Omega, those are all fingernails to me.
Okay.
The purpose isn't the job or the company. It isn't even the accomplishment. It's not a bank account. That's not purpose. Those are tools. Those are assets. And so I view them the same way I view fingernails. And I think I've mixed up for the longest time. I've always thought that the goal was, what can I go do? What can I go build? What can I go whatever? And I get reminded all the time in my prayer time that God's not in the business. He's in the people business. I need to be the same way.
Yeah.
The people that I interact with, whether or not they have a faith or don't have, that's what this world is. That's, I think, why we love social networks. This is all about meaningful interaction with people, helping each other live a good, wholesome, successful life. It doesn't mean financially successful. It means generationally successful. It means with love and the expression of love. That, to me, is more important than the fingernails that I use on a daily basis as tools.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's the way I've had to start viewing money. Yep. I went through an unbelievable journey with money and how I had to be unwound of how I view finances. And but that's views everything, including business. And so for me, the purpose, the noble, I always tell everybody, the noble isn't the nonprofit. The noble is the people. The noble is the people I'm speaking to. They're noble. That's the way we solve this. We don't solve this through a nonprofit or a for-profit. They're great tools, but it's the people that come into alignment with a purpose, with a vision, and the purpose is anchored in people.
Awesome. All right, I'm gonna shift gears here a little bit, and maybe get a little personal.
Okay.
When I see the movie Taken, right, with Liam Neeson.
I've never seen that movie, actually. I don't know that I could stomach that movie. I know enough about it.
See, I can't. Yeah. So just thinking about it right now turns my stomach. So it's just such a hard movie to see, at least till the end. But you're in that business, in that arena. And so I got to ask the question, how do you manage, if managing is the word, how do you balance the despair that you experience in the world and hope? How do you balance that and come out healthy on the other side?
Well, I'm really fortunate to be on an end of that equation where I don't have to deal with that every day. There are people, Homeland Security has this cyber C3 organization, and there's people, investigators every day looking at horrible images. And there's NCMEC, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They do the same thing.
Oh my gosh.
These survivor organizations that work with these rescued people. My heart just, melts. That's not the side of the equation I'm on, but I am around it. And so I remember, I think I mentioned I was at the United Nations middle of last year, and I was so blessed to be a part of a 2-day event around this proliferation of child sexual abuse material online. And I got to hear for the first day all these amazing organizations, rescue organizations, and doctors and professionals and experts in this field share the amount of trauma that these children go through and what it's like to help them through this process. And my heart was just wrecked at the end of that day. What these people do that work with these victims and rescue them is unbelievable. I am so grateful to all of them that they're in this business and that they have a heart. The way I see the hope, where I go into, and again, I'm not directly, it may be a different story if I was working that close, but I do have another story too. But to finish this one, where I am, I see at the end of that United Nations discussion, the second day, we talked about what's being done. And they mentioned all the tech companies that aren't helping. They mentioned all the lack of funding. It was all, what can we do? And at the end of the discussion, we talked about financial services. And I got to speak. And with another great friend of mine and somebody who's doing amazing, Stuart Davis is his name. He's out of Toronto. We got to share what the financial industry is doing. And they've said more is being done in the financial services than any other sector to fight child sexual exploitation. So where I get into, where my hope is, I know in my personal life, when there's something that needs to get addressed, we shine a light on it.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm seeing in the world. Whether it starts with the Me Too's and the Epsteins and all these things that have just gone into this whole thing, or we look at just the amount of knowledge we have around financial exploitation of elders. Yeah. We are now more aware of the interconnectivity, and that's what I'm seeing. And I'm seeing now thousands of people wake up and saying, hey, you know what? I want to get involved. So for me, it's easier for me to operate every day on hope. Now, it's not saying I don't have to have conversations that I wish I didn't, but I get to deal with people on the side of the equation that I'm seeing people awaken and invest and get involved and volunteer at times. Last year, we had 865 people volunteer for projects around the detection of these exploitations. Yeah. So for me, it's easier to operate in that posture of hope and encourage others.
Okay, great. So would you say that's fueling your passion and your purpose, or is it part of it? Kind of what's really getting you out of bed in the morning, especially when you're facing challenges, right? Where there's just something maybe insurmountable. What's really fueling keeping going, that perseverance?
Well, I would have to tell you, I've had to deal with that even in the last 10 weeks. So I have an amazing business partner, a guy named Ben Wallach, on our for-profit, and we give 10% of our gross revenue to the Noble to help support the nonprofit mission. But I, for 2 years, was helping build this business that's now the number one fraud services business in the industry. But I, about 10 weeks ago, came to the point where I'm spending so much time on this side, I need to be closer to, again, what I feel is closer to the people, closer to what my focus needs to be. I need to realign my focus. So for the last 10 weeks, I've had to realign my focus. And this is something everybody individually has to do. Ben is one of the most gifted business people I know. Yeah. He is so process oriented. I always joke that God made a whole human being by putting him and I together, and a gentleman named Dave Warland who leads the Noble. I mean, it's amazing how I'm surrounded by these amazing leaders that help this. But I constantly have to remain in a posture and find time to be grounded in what is true for me. And the important thing is not impress that on anyone else. Just because there's something that I need to do doesn't mean that's what it looks like for someone else to walk it out. And that's the thing I constantly have to remind myself. So to me, I have to have alone time, my walks, to understand why I do what I do. And then it's easy to get off path a little bit. Yep. And once I recognize it, just come back on and realign and reevaluate and remain in a posture of gratitude. And so that's it.
That's great. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's get. I want to hear about your creative side, as if all this wasn't creative already. But look, you're a musician, singer, songwriter. I pretend to be one, and so I think we're connecting on that one. Sadly, you didn't have a piano here, so we couldn't jam together. But we have to fix that.
Okay.
We have to fix that
Let's
part.
do it.
But tell me, how does that creative part? And I think I've heard you speak on this, that authentic part of you, music, that outlet. And I've seen you speak, at least on some videos, where out comes the guitar.
Yeah.
So tell me about that outlet. And I'm kind of wondering, is that something that a lot of us need? Do they need that creative side? Is that helpful? Is it just you? Kind of talk a little bit about that.
It comes back to the word authentic.
Yeah.
So I have 3 beautiful kids, and my oldest is all engineering.
Okay.
He picks up the guitar every once in a while, but he's just as brilliant. He's a brilliant mind. He loves to play baseball. He's just as I don't know that creative side exists in him, but for me it has. Since the age of 6, I've been writing music.
Wow.
And it's just like my growing the fingernails. It just comes out of me. When I'm in a right place, when I'm in a place of peace, when I'm in a place of challenge, just songs come out. I can't explain it. So for me, that's one of my barometers in life. I went through a period where my producer passed away about a little over a year ago. A dear friend of mine, Chuck Harris. He has helped me for the last 3 years put out some of the most beautiful music I've ever been a part of in my life, and taught me and inspired me, and just one of the best people on the planet I've ever known.
Oh,
and he passed away. And so I haven't recorded really or even much written a song in the last year as I'm processing my little dogs here as you're going to hear leaves crunching, you guys. Sorry.
That's all right.
But as I'm processing what music is, and when I'm in the right place, it comes out. It's important for me in my conversations because it's a tool that I have in communication to be authentic. So I'm going to speak in New Orleans in a couple weeks. I'll be speaking here up in Cleveland, Tennessee, and I always bring a guitar. Yeah. Because not only do I find music is a wonderful vehicle for expressing emotion and heart and neutralizing a lot of noise, but at the same time, it's authentically me. And that's the most important thing, is that I can be authentic in what I'm saying and what I'm singing and what I speak. And that's my biggest encouragement to everyone. We need more people. There's been a lie in corporate America that if you're creative or if you have a hobby, you leave that at the door and you are fully professional. And I think that's a lie. I think that's actually neutralized our creativity, our innovation. It's entrapped people. It's made people upset and depressed. And so by me being a little quirky, that I'm going and pulling out a guitar in front of 500 law enforcement professionals, it actually demonstrates that we can be fully authentic and effective.
Well, that's funny because it bit me one time. I was interviewing with a company, and an industrial psychologist put me through this test. And one of the tests, the last question or one of the questions was, what's one of your biggest dreams in life? And at the time, it was to win a Grammy. And I'm pretty sure that was the one that kind of kicked me off the list because it was with a financial institution, funny enough.
Yeah.
And they were looking for someone who was a little more focused on the numbers and the product than dreaming about winning a Grammy.
Some of the best people I've ever worked with, though, have the most interesting hobbies and passions. And if we can appreciate those as human beings, you have the most engaged team on the planet. It's amazing. That's again, I think it's just a little lie that's kind of seeped its way into our culture, our business culture. And I think for that reason, we've kind of quenched some of the innovation and some of the fruit of that.
Well, it might have something to do with age too. I think when I was younger, I didn't feel the freedom to be as creative. Like I kind of, well, as you know, I was with a big four, big eight firm at the time, and kind of had to fall in line, right? And it wasn't well received to step out of line. Maybe it is a little bit more now that you can be creative and probably be more accepted within an organization, because bringing your authentic self to work is certainly more accepted. Where do you draw the line in authenticity?
Well, I've been coached on my suit style, on my tie color. I remember there was one time I was walking down the hallway and there was an executive, the head, one of the top guys in this bank, and his senior executive over another portfolio, and the big executive said, "Pull up your pants." And this senior executive was new to the team, and he had colorful socks on, and he said, "There's a time and place for colorful socks, and this isn't either." so I mean, that's the culture that's been around. So, but there is a level of professionalism that when I talk to young people, we have to, and this is where my coaching of the team, when I meet with my own team on Mission Omega, I'm so encouraged by this movement of young people. A lot of people are disheartened. I see nothing but passionate people that are not willing to be bought or sold. At the same time, I do think there is just like raising kids, there's coaching that needs to be involved, and encouragement and direction and giving the whys. And so I do think that there's a place for complete expression and measured expression, but no expression is not an option. And so to me, it's like, how are we authentic, and how do we keep environments where, when we're managing people, we ask questions. And so,
well, I had a mentor that I used to work with. His name was Wayne Luke, who he was out there, which I just loved about him. And he would play the guitar at some, sales conferences. And I just, he just put himself out there and he didn't care. But I think everybody just was enamored with that. And I think that's such a great way to just present yourself as, look, I may not be the best, but I'm just going to give what I have of myself to you.
See, that's it. That's so to me, we can't stifle that in people. We need them to be authentic themselves. We need to help. I didn't know who I was until I'm 46 now, until I was maybe 45. I mean, I'm still figuring out myself. Yeah. And so as we help our young people through that journey of unwrapping the gift that's them, right? We all are still unwrapping it, all the way up until one of my best friends is 85 years old, and he's still trying to figure himself out. And so he was a monk for like 42 years. And so he was by himself for a long time, and he's still trying to figure it out. And so I just think that as we all get to experience and unwrap each other's gifts and be a part of as we exploring ourselves, I think it's done a lot healthier in an encouraging environment.
All right. Is there, and I hate to use the expression, another road?
I love it. There you go.
Yeah, we'll get to that later. Is there another road in your career that you see on the horizon? I mean, look, you got a lot of time ahead, so a lot of runway left. Yeah.
I don't know. I try to take everything day by day now versus getting too far planning. But I will tell you, right now I'm working with, our family's working with a family of a refugee. Okay. So this is something that I've wanted to get involved in. It's something that, and so we have a family who basically, that we're working with that, I got to be careful how much I share, but they exposed a human trafficking ring in another country, and they're getting away from potential risk. And anyway, so very long story short, we're working with them just on, and what I've learned in the process is, the escape of some of the refugees. I've seen videos of just what it looks like to go through the jungle and to be chased. I mean, I think one of them, one of the stories I've heard through one of the refugees we know is they rescued like 17 children in the jungle that had been abandoned. Wow. One of them was 2 months old. I mean, so it's interesting as we work closer kind of with this, I think there's so much need. So to me, I like the idea of walking that out and seeing what happens. But I think for me, the other road, I have no doubt. This is going to be a great year. I've got a lot of hopes for this year.
Well, you talk about the two mountains, one which is your work and the other is your music. Do you feel like over time those have been coming closer and closer together?
Yeah, that's where I was going with that story. They are completely one mountain now. So I'm trying to be authentically Ian in all circumstances. Oh, that's so, and that's true for even just my pursuits. Trying to operate that way as full Ian as much as I can be.
That's great. Yeah. Well, we're kind of starting to wrap this up. I do have my one classic question is around your career. Would you say that your career is consuming you, or you're consuming your career?
I think definitely I guess, me consuming my career.
Yeah.
Again, just look at it as a vehicle, whatever a career means. I think it's being built just by me walking, and somebody might come and call something my career. I don't know that I know how to define it at this point, at least this stage of my life. So I guess...
Well, what I heard earlier is your career was consuming you.
It was.
On the front end.
Absolutely, yeah.
And making that shift made all the difference.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like there was a valley there in between that you had to go through to kind of figure that out.
Very thankful for that valley.
That's great. And then lastly, and I meant to ask this earlier, how can just the average listener participate in solving this problem?
Oh, I love the question. Remember I told you that 75% of human trafficking is labor trafficking that makes our clothing and textiles?
Yeah.
I would say start caring about where you put your money. I had a choice on a new HVAC system. I had to buy a house, and I had to pay $1,000 more for a company that actually wanted to fight forced labor.
Wow.
And actually looked at their supply chain. So put your money and maybe value nice things versus cheap things. Maybe have less things versus more. Just to look at the way we are consumers, I think that's huge. And then have awkward conversations with your children and your parents about scams and the risk in scams. Be courageous in these conversations. You don't have to be an expert. Go watch certain movies are out there. You mentioned Taken. There's a movie, Sound of Freedom, that's been polarizing, but still it addresses an issue. There's a new movie on Netflix about scams. I will tell you, just start having these conversations. Be aware. I think that's the biggest thing. Create awareness. And if it's too good to be true, it's too good to be true, no matter what.
Well, we're on to my favorite part of the podcast. That's the lightning round.
Let's do it.
You ready?
Okay.
All right. If you could,
no.
If you could tour with anybody, who would it be?
James Taylor.
Really?
Yeah.
All right. That speaks volumes about you. Yeah, I love James Taylor. I think I learned to play guitar with James Taylor's style, and I love that. Best guitar player of all time.
Oh my gosh, I'm the worst. I can't name a single one.
Come on.
No, I really can't. Like Eric Clapton. I love listening to Eric Clapton.
He's good.
Yeah.
He's got a great guitar face.
Yes.
If you didn't have music, what would your creative outlet be?
For me, it's probably the working out. It's always been one-on-one.
Working out? Okay.
I got long COVID a couple years ago, and I've been dealing with chronic fatigue syndrome the last 2 years.
Wow.
But that's probably what I'd be doing. My health, hiking, that kind of stuff, that would probably be still my outlet.
Got it. All right. Best place for tacos?
Cabo Fish Taco in Charlotte, North Carolina, or Roanoke, Virginia.
Nice. That came out pretty quick.
Yeah, I love that place.
Shout out. We'll have to put something in the notes for those. And if you couldn't live in the United States, where would you live?
I'd love to go back to Asia.
Yeah.
I love Asia, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
What do you love about it?
Again, it just goes back to, I think every time I find myself in Asia, I just feel there's a weird, when I say this, it sounds weird, but like home, I feel something so familiar about the people, the mindset, the culture. And I felt that way when I was in China. I feel that way when I'm in Singapore or Thailand, you name it. I love Asia. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, how can someone find you, follow you, connect with you?
You can go to entmitchell.com and click on a button, and you can find me anywhere there. The Noble, you can go check out The Noble. My music's on Spotify, Ian Mitchell.
Is it thenoble.org?
Thenoble.com, actually.
Okay.
The .org was taken by a pest control company. We tried to get them to change it and trade it, and they wouldn't. So we're .com, even though we're a nonprofit. So The Noble, Knoble, THEKNOBLE.com. And you look LinkedIn is a common way. Ian Mitchell on there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, Ian, I'd love to hear some music from you.
Okay.
So we're going to kind of cut that in.
Okay.
At some point after we tour the grounds.
Go for a ride on a golf cart.
But until then, I want to thank you so much for your hospitality. I mean, you put out a spread for the green room and just inviting me into your home and this beautiful view. Such a treat to spend time with you and get to know you a little bit.
Thank you for what you're doing. I think it's so amazing. What a neat angle on a podcast, and we need more purpose-led people running around this world.
Yes.
And so just thank you for doing that.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us on Consuming Careers. If you've enjoyed the show, please click the follow button in your podcast app so you won't miss any of our future episodes. And if you have a minute, write us a review. We truly appreciate hearing from our listeners. And as always, I'm Bruce Smith, and you've been listening to Consuming Careers.
I didn't always feel this way. There were times when I struggled to get through each day. I remember sitting in my car, crying in my driveway, overwhelmed by the thought of carrying on, drowning in the sorrows of my sad little song. But I love my life. I love the life we've built. I love the times we've had, both the good and the bad. I love our life. Even though the days were hard, we pressed on and on. There were times we almost gave in, but I'm glad we held on. 'Cause I love my life. I love the life we've built. I love the times we've had, both the good and the bad. I love our life. 'Cause they don't write love stories like this. Most would stop reading 2 chapters in. The best thing that we ever did was stick it out. I love our life. I love the life we've built. I love the times we've had, both the good and the bad. I love our life. I love the life we built. I love the times we've had, both the good and the bad. I love our life.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Well done.
Yeah, thanks for letting me share that.
Oh, thank
I really
you so
appreciate
much
it.
for doing that. That's